Welcome back to the channel, guys. I know it's been a really long time since I've posted any travel content, but I'm here in Berlin outside the Reichstag, which is the German parliament, and I want to just do a quick little sort of mix of history vlog and also present-day politics, because today, once again, Berlin is a site of some international intrigue, partly because of its geopolitical position here in the European Union, kind of at the juncture of Western and Central Europe, and also because of some of the things that are happening to the east, which I think most of us are well aware. So let's take a little walk, or skate. I first came here to Berlin 26 summers ago, the summer of 1998. And at the time, Berlin had only reunified basically about 8 years before. The wall came down, of course, began to come down in November of 1989. The city, I think, wasn't really truly reunified until sometime in early 1990. And when I first came here, there was a massive construction project going on here at the Reichstag, repairing it from war damage from the Second World War, and also building the big glass dome up top. And I remember going on a walking tour of East and West Berlin, which was still kind of felt divided at the time, and the city was still kind of mending itself back together. And it's crazy to think now that decades have gone by. So here we are at the backside of the Brandenburg Gate, or Brandenburger Tor, which once divided, as most of you probably know, East and West Berlin. And today it's been pretty much totally restored, and it's just just a really interesting site. It's mostly a tourist attraction, and instead of any kind of barrier or division that it may have once symbolized, today it's actually a symbol of German unity. It's the Brandenburg Gate is a symbol of German reunification. It was actually built by the King of Prussia at the end of the 1700s, and it was meant to be a symbol of peace. But the gate has stood for a good number of things over the years, and all sorts of characters have passed through it, from Napoleon when he came to Berlin, claiming to have conquered the city in the early 1800s, to the rise of Hitler in the 1930s. Ronald Reagan was there in 1987 saying, the famous quote, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And so this gate has meant many things to many people. But today it's really a symbol of German prosperity and history. There's a lot of interesting history with relation to this. And if any of you have been following my channel for a while, you may remember me mentioning that when I was at the Acropolis last year, that the gate was actually designed after the Propylaea, which is the entrance to the Acropolis in Athens. And instead of the white marble ubiquitous in classical Greece, the Athenian Propylaea homage here, the Brandenburg Gate, was actually built out of sandstone, which was something much more apparently readily available or cheaper for the Prussians to construct. There is a fascinating history with what is known as the quadriga at the top, which is the goddess in the chariot with the 4 horses. Apparently the quadriga there's been all types of intrigue related to the quadriga and the different wars and revolutions that have swept through what is known as Pariser Platz, which is the plaza on the east side of the Brandenburger Tor. And at one point the quadriga was actually captured by Napoleon's army and boxed up and taken back to the Louvre in Paris. And then apparently some years later, the Prussians conquered Paris and burst into the Louvre and took the quadriga back and brought it back in pieces and reassembled it on top of the gate. And what the Brandenburg Gate symbolizes, I think, for a lot of people from my generation, it was something that I remember from Hollywood films and comic books and things growing up, was that it symbolized the division not only of East and West Germany and East and West Berlin, but Eastern and Western Europe, and at the time what was known as the Iron Curtain, or the Warsaw Pact states, that were what we often called the Soviet satellite states. They weren't, of of course, constituent republics of the Soviet Union, but they were all basically allied, or you can even derisively say puppet states of the Soviet Union. And to be able to cross the way I just did from 1961 until November of 1989, of course, was impossible because the Berlin Wall existed. And that made Berlin Europe's principal divided capital. And for any viewers who've been watching my channel since the early days, if you saw any of the Nicosia episodes in Cyprus, Cypriots and the international media often refer to Nicosia as Europe's last divided capital. And I always thought that that was sort of an oblique way of referencing the reunification of Berlin, and that Nicosia, which was divided in 1974 between Cypriot Turks and Cypriot Greeks and the Turkish military, I always thought that that was a way of referencing that, you know, that Germany had been able to move on, but Cyprus never has. And just as a side reference, there are a couple of other divided cities that still exist in the world today, and they are both in northern Syria, which are the cities of Hasaka and Al-Qamishli in Hasaka Governorate in northeastern Syria. And they're divided between the Autonomous Administration of Northeast Syria and the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad. And part of the reason I'm mentioning that is, as I said, there are often protests here, and there is a small muted protest for the Syrian opposition. And so I thought that was kind of ironic. Far from the news pictures of my boyhood, this place is just actually incredibly peaceful. It's just a really enjoyable walking plaza today. And I love to see that that's happened. And it's kind of a symbol of Germany's success. I mean, Germany is pretty much the economic engine of the European Union today in 2024. And it certainly shows. Today, Berlin has once again become interesting. And, you know, in the 1980s, when I was growing up, Berlin was almost synonymous with the term espionage, because you had the East and West, and you had the different sectors, you know, the Soviet sector, the American sector, the British sector, and so forth. And I'm sitting here in a park just down the street from Bruiser Platz, and just behind me is the embassy of the Russian Federation. And I'm not filming directly in front of it, number one, because there's a ton of layers of barriers, and I don't know if the police regarding the embassy would be too excited about that. But there was an interesting BBC report last week about acts of Russian espionage and outright sabotage here in the Federal Republic of Germany. And the article postulates that Germany may indeed be the tipping point in a new Cold War between East and West, because Germany has been an ardent supporter of both the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and the Ukrainian military. And the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, he sort of has this tagline about Ukraine, that Germany will support Ukraine, quote, as long as it takes, end quote. And today there's, you know, just there's a lot of funny things going on where they believe that there are acts being carried out by the Russians to basically undermine German security, or there was even an assassination plot against a German weapons and munitions maker that was uncovered. So there's a lot of actually really interesting things going on in what is mostly thought of as basically quiet, you know, 21st century Berlin, long having unshackled itself from the Cold War. There's a bit of a controversy too here in Germany in terms of Germany's aid to Ukraine, and it actually has a couple of different drivers behind it. One is that in order to work out the 2025 German federal budget, the proposed aid to Ukraine has been reduced. Now, Germany has been Ukraine's biggest supplier of both, I think, financial aid, munitions, and weapon systems from the European Union. And to make the budget work in Chancellor Scholz's coalition government, they've had to reduce aid for 2025, which actually is bad news for Ukraine, especially if you know, if Trump and Vance were to come to power in the United States, whom have promised to somehow vaguely end the war in Ukraine, or, you know, increase America's isolationism. And if that were to happen, Ukraine would be dependent on Germany more than ever before in its fight with the Russian Federation and its military. So, you know, how that would happen, nobody really knows. I mean, the Schultz-led government has said that frozen Russian assets would be used to actually fund German aid to Ukraine rather than euros from the German federal budget. No one's really quite sure how this would work. And just a short skate away from the Brandenburg Gate and the Russian embassy, I believe, is the Ukraine embassy. So I'm just going to do a little cruise by there to try and finish this quick vlog. To actually skate around, and I don't know if the whole city is on holiday or what, but it is easy breezy cruising around here. One thing that hasn't changed since I first came in here in the late 90s is that so much of the center is still being either reconstructed or built wholly new. So just behind me is the comparatively very modest Embassy of Ukraine here in Berlin, and this also is a complicated picture because of, and I'll try and say this quietly, but because of the Nord Stream explosion in 2022, which was the gas pipeline from Russia to Germany. And there are, I'm gonna move along to just do a bit of a roving vlog, but you can see how small the Ukrainian embassy is compared to the Russian Federation embassy. And now I think I can speak at a little more normal volume. So there is suspicion by the government here in Berlin that it was actually Ukraine behind the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. You know, there have been conspiracy theories that it was the Biden administration behind it, all the way till, you know, there are even wilder ones that the Russians were somehow behind it, which doesn't seem to make any logical sense, even for a regime as bizarre and twisted as that of Vladimirovich Putin. But yeah, so there is tension, you know, definitely between different wings of the German political spectrum, both on the far right and the far left, about aid to Ukraine. And part of it has to do with the still unsolved mystery of the Nord Stream sabotage. And yeah, otherwise, look how wide the boulevards are here. It's like there's an old expression, they roll the sidewalks out at night. Here you can just sort of It's crazy. It seems to me that the war between Russia and Ukraine, from a German perspective, is a fairly divisive issue. You know, there are people here who are protesting, you know, on behalf of Gaza, and as we just saw at the Brandenburg Gate, and on behalf of Syria and all types of other further afield political issues. But Ukraine, which is just practically at Germany's doorstep, it's only 2 countries away with Poland in between. I think it's a much more thorny issue because after, you know, how much Germany was at the center of the Cold War, I think a lot of Germans today don't want Germany to reprise that role under any circumstances. But what's unclear is, will Germany have a choice? You know, it's like, because of Germany's geographic location, it's, you know, Germany, as you know, it's Western Europe, it's also Central Europe. I mean, Berlin here, I feel like, is the gateway to the East. You know, it's just, you know, Poland is just a stone's throw away, although I know the Poles consider themselves Central Europeans today, long after the Warsaw Pact was dissolved. But, I mean, I think there's still a lot of uncertainty for what Germany's place is in this crazy multipolar, new world order that's occurring and unfolding in front of us. A land war in Europe is, I think, something that most of us thought was simply a relic of the past, and the type of grand geopolitical event that just wouldn't happen in the 21st century, when history was supposed to have ended, according to Francis Fukuyama in the 1990s, when the Cold War ended and the world was going to turn towards democracy, and democratization was going to happen like dominoes collapsing around the world. But that clearly hasn't happened. As I'm walking here past the Russian Federation embassy, Vladimir Putin has effectively been in power since the fall of 1999. That's about 25 years ago. So hopes for democracy in Russia quickly faded, and to use a German term, the Realpolitik, the real politics, have set in. It's taken a couple of decades, and I think Germany and the Russian Federation have had friendly, at least economic, cooperative relations for quite a long time. Germany was reliant for many, many years on Russian gas in the winter for people to heat their homes. And now things have changed. The chess pieces have moved, and Ukraine is invading Kursk region in Russia and making, in the past, incursions into Belgorod. And the reality has simply shifted. So what does all this mean for the future of Germany and that of the West writ large? I'm under the impression that authorities here in Berlin and economic authorities at, say, the European Central Bank in Frankfurt are far more comfortable with the idea of Germany being an economic leader and powerhouse more than a military one. But with the war in Ukraine not really all that far away, although the bulk of it is in eastern Ukraine, this is just an unavoidable issue for Germany, and especially where the city of Berlin is physically located in terms of its geography, its proximity to the Polish border, and Poland borders the Russian Federation in terms of the exclave of Kaliningrad. There are a lot of questions that need to be answered, and I understand that there's some skepticism within the German polity as far as like how much should we keep supporting Ukraine and how much money needs to be put back into constantly rebuilding and upkeeping Germany's own infrastructure and so forth. So I think there's a lot that remains to be seen, but Chancellor Scholz and his coalition government are, at least for now, committed to helping in the defense of Ukraine, but not necessarily at whatever cost. As far as Scholz said, as long as it takes. That may not be true. And the West definitely isn't united on how to support Ukraine because of isolationist tendencies and other economic driving factors. And it's very similar in the United States. There are a lot of those, both on the right and the left, back home in my country, who think like, why are we getting so deeply involved in this foreign war when we need to be investing in infrastructure at home in the United States? And I think, to some degree, Germany is asking itself a lot of those same questions. And no, I don't know, we don't know how long this war is going to go on for, but it's definitely not going to be ending this year, that's for sure. So here in Berlin, once the geopolitical epitome of the Cold War and a symbol of its end, may in fact be the epicenter of a second Cold War between Russia and the West, as tensions continue to mount over the war in Ukraine and Europe's role in its defense. Once again, thank you guys for watching, and if you'd like to see more content like this, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks.